Welcome back to 405 Sports. It is UFC 287 Fight Day. Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 4/2, whatever you want to call it. You know, they fought twice in kickboxing, and now they're going to fight twice in MMA. Obviously, Alex Pereira holds a 3-0 record against him. Some might argue that Izzy won the decision. It's whatever, you know. People can do that for all they want, but it's official. 3-0 for Alex Pereira, so he is the boogeyman of Israel Adesanya. You know, he chased him down from kickboxing. I mean, went through the division of the middleweight division. You know, had 2 unranked wins. They gave him Sean Strickland, and then you saw what happened at UFC 276 when he beat Sean Strickland. And now he's the champion. He was going to lose 4-1. He took the second round, I believe. He was going to lose a 49-46 decision at UFC 281. But he got the 5th round knockout over Izzy. Izzy's first career knockout loss in MMA. Obviously, he just had his first career loss back in 2021 at UFC 259 when he moved up to fight Jan Blachowicz. But this fight is so tough because it's obviously like Izzy wins the majority of the fights that these guys have been in. Like, he's won majority of the fight. It's just Alex Pereira has these hands of literal steel. Like, the hands he has, like, it touches you and you're done. So I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how Izzy even stayed up. Like, legitimately, it's insane to think about that Izzy was, you know, he didn't even get knocked down, and it's kind of crazy to think about that. I am going to take Israel Adesanya. I think this should be a pick'em. I really don't think that Alex should be the underdog. The only reason Alex is the underdog is obvious because he's had 8 fights in MMA. So that is the reason he's the underdog, and, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Alex won, but I'm going with Izzy. Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal, who looks like a middleweight right now. I mean, Jorge Masvidal has to be the most overrated star in the history of MMA, in my opinion. I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to say that. The things I don't like about Jorge are just, there's a lot. Like, at the press conference, when was the last time Colby Covington had a finish? Well, his last finish was more recent than your last finish. You're 0-3. He's talking about wanting a title shot after everything. Even after he pulled out against Leon Edwards, he was like, you know, I'm still due for a title shot. Even though Kamaru slept this guy. He's the number 11th ranked guy. Like, he judges Colby for wrestling when it's like, dude, you sound like a little MMA crybaby when people wrestle. It's MMA. Like, that is what you, like, that's part of it. So I'm going with Gilbert Burns. I don't like Jorge. Plain and simple. He's a big complainer and he asks for a lot. And, you know, Gilbert can beat him anywhere, to be honest. Gilbert can beat him with his jab. Gilbert can beat him with his wrestling / jiu-jitsu because obviously Gilbert is the most underrated jiu-jitsu practitioner in the UFC. He's the most underrated wrestler in the UFC, in my opinion. Maybe not most underrated wrestler. Definitely the jiu-jitsu, maybe not the wrestling. But all I'm saying is Gilbert Burns is going to walk through Jorge Masvidal. Now, here's one of my favorite fights of the card. I love Adrian Yanez. He's probably like my favorite fighter that isn't a mainstay fighter, you know, just yet. You know, he's only had 5 fights in the UFC, so he's getting to that mainstay, obviously, because he's the featured bout of a main card, of an Israel Adesanya card. You know, one of the top 10 biggest draws in the UFC, Israel Adesanya is, of all time at that. And people can argue if he's not, whatever. He sold the most in 2021, 2022, and in 2020. So argue what you want, you know. Adrian Yanez is an absolute dog. And these guys both have chins. So I don't know. I could see this fight either ending quick or being a long war, but I don't really know. I am going to go with Adrian Yanez, one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. He's fun to watch. I watched him in UFC Austin, Cater versus Emmett. He knocked out Tony Kelly. It was amazing. He flipped him off. It was perfect. It's all love for these two guys. Like, I honestly, like, their games remind me so much of each other. Like, this is going to be a boxing war. So it'll be a great fight, probably fight of the night right here, of the main card at least. Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio has been around for a long time. He's a dog. His last win, UFC 282 against Alex Morano. He was losing that fight, and then he got the 3rd round knockout. And I'm going to go with Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland's just a very active fighter. Obviously, he had a tough last couple fights. Stephen Thompson, obviously, always a dog. I mean, his striking is unbelievable. Khamzat Chimaev, he didn't even give Kevin Holland a second to think about striking. I mean, he took him down from the literal 2 seconds in. So I am going to go Kevin Holland. Adrian Yanez and Kevin Holland, when they were last on the card together, did pretty well. So I'm going to go with Kevin Holland on that one. Initially, when I heard this fight being booked, I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's perfect. You don't ever really get that where you get two young guys to fight at the young age that they are. You don't ever really get to see that because they want to keep these guys till, they grow up a little bit and then they can fight, right? And I really feel like Christian Rodriguez has the ability to be a, really good bantamweight fighter. He had a tough fight against TJ Pierce. I mean, TJ Pierce is very good in the featherweight division, so the drop makes sense. Then again, he has missed weight for the bantamweight division multiple times. He's missed it twice. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's like he's lost at featherweight, but at the same time, he's also missed weight at bantamweight. So he's just in a tough spot. Raul Rosas Jr. looked so good at UFC 282. It's awesome that we get to see this guy on a main card. I know a lot of people were complaining about it, but if you look at the guys like Muhammad Mokaev, he's a very young guy, but they like him a lot. So they really want to grow these guys. Think of a guy like a John Jones. Muhammad Mokaev and Raul Rosas Jr. have the age to where they could be a younger champ than when John Jones won at 23. So the UFC is really growing the stock on these guys. I know Chris Curtis was not very happy about being on the undercard because he is a ranked fighter and he's under this fight. But the UFC just want to grow these guys' stock. So it makes sense to me. Chris Curtis, Kelvin Gastelum. I think this is plain and simple Chris Curtis by whatever he wants to do. Kelvin Gastelum hasn't fought in about 2 years. He's only been fighting 5-rounders, Jared Cannonier and Robert Whittaker. And I don't know, the guy he did look good, I'll admit it. He made weight. Good for him. I'm just taking Chris Curtis. He's kind of been, besides the Jack Hermanson fight where Jack was point fighting him, Chris Curtis has been an absolute dog. So I'm gonna roll with Chris Curtis on this one. I think Michelle Waterson gets back into the win column after her loss from UFC Long Island versus Amanda Lemos. I think she just gets back into the win column off of her striking. She's always an underrated striker. And, she's in the strawweight division for this fight. So she's kind of looked off and on in the strawweight division, so I don't know how to feel, but I am going to take her to win this one. Joe Pyfer. Be like Joe Pyfer, what Dana White said after his win on the Dana White's Contender Series versus Gerald Meerschaert. I'm going to go with Joe Pyfer. He's just a fun guy to watch, man. He's got heavy hands for the middleweight division. Gerald might bring out his wrestling, but Gerald looked good in his last fight against Bruno Silva at UFC San Diego. So I'm excited to see how this fight goes because I could see it actually being a striking war, but Gerald can always rely back on that wrestling and his jiu-jitsu. I am going to go with Joe Pyfer, though. Chase Sherman, Carl Williams. I'm surprised that Chase is the favorite, but I guess he's got better striking than Carl Williams. But Carl Williams is a dog in wrestling, so I wouldn't be surprised if from the opening tip he's just gonna wrestle him, So he had 8 takedowns at UFC Las Vegas with Merab and Peter Yan. He was on that card. He had 8 takedowns in that fight, so I would not be surprised if he just wrestles them in this fight. But I don't know, Chase Sherman, he does have some hands. All right, 2 underrated fights here. Ignacio Bahamas is an absolute dog. If you didn't see the spinning wheel kick, it is an amazing finish in the 3rd round where he was winning a fight. But he has this fight. It's against Trey Ogden at a catch weight of 160. I'm going to take him. I was going to see him at UFC 277, but he didn't get to fight because the guy backed out. I'm very excited to see him. He's a very, very good prospect in the lightweight division. Obviously, he's at a catch weight, but, lightweight division. And then Steve Garcia versus Shannon. I can't say his last name, but if you recognize him, he was in the fight against James Krause's fighter where, he knocked him out, or I guess TKO'd him by leg kick, and, the whole thing happened. So, kind of funny to see him back. I don't know if the media asked him about it, but that'd be kind of funny if they did ask him about how it went. I'm going to go with him to win this fight. He's had over 50 fights in MMA, so from top to bottom, this card is really, really good, honestly. I wish there was 2 title fights. I always like 2 title fights just because, at the end, it's you get to them and it's man, we just watched a great card, and now we have 2 title fights on top of it. And obviously, not every title fight goes amazing, but it's always nice to have 2 title fights. But that's all right. We will see how these go. I'm very excited for this card. It's a very good card. The top 7, I mean, are just great fights. So check out UFC 287. It's going to be a great card. And thank you for watching the video.